So, Trev, talk to me about recent events. I know that you have experienced love in your life. You've also experienced loss. And lately, that has been a season of life. You're going through a season where there's some loss. What is something that you can share with the audience for anyone that's also going through loss, and how you're managing your emotions and your feelings, and how you're coping and mourning, and
Well,
how you're healing through that?
loss is it's a strange one because um, when you lose people, you have to acknowledge that you either acknowledge the loss, if that makes sense, and that means that you acknowledge whatever happens to your soul, mind, body during the process of loss, which could be a week, a year, 2 and 10 years, and you have to acknowledge that that loss is having a fundamental vibrational change in how you see and exist in the world, because you've now had to adjust to something very traumatic. Or you do the opposite, which is to deny it and to pretend that it doesn't have any effect on you, and that you're living your life and you're fine and everything is great. And I believe all you're doing really is just prolonging the inevitable, because it's you and the grief have to meet, and you have to have a discussion with your other self. The self that wants to live in denial has to face the self that is dealing with the reality. And the reality self is the self that's usually in more pain. The self that's in denial is the self that escapes through choices and distractions, and uses that window to tell itself via the ego that it's winning. I think grief really weighs up not just the loss of a loved one or someone dear or not, because there are times people lose people and they're quite okay with that, you know. Um, they're okay with that loss. They may have been involved
Yeah.
in the demise of that event happening where that loss was taken. Um, and for them, that's just like mathematics. You know, it's a very pragmatic process. Um, so I think grief is very complex, and the way I've tried to deal with grief with my family and just my friends, people close, and I've lost a lot of people in a very short space of time. Um, I've tried to just surrender any knowledge of knowledge, and accept that I don't know what the next chapter of the grief process is. That surprised, that way I'm open, that way if it's sad and emotional for people around me and friends who are all supporting each other in that loss, that's a day that we embrace. That is that kind of day. And it could be a day where you feel a connection to the loss in some magical way, and that connection inspires you, lifts your energy, gives you a boost in some way, and then the loss doesn't have the same impact or trauma that it had when you were feeling it in the way that most people feel it, which is to be sad and tragic and down. And that is all part of it. There's no denying that there isn't pain involved in loss. But I,
Right. Right. Oh, I feel that so deeply. One of the things that I've definitely felt and gone through is just allowing ourselves to go through the process of grief and embracing what we can't change, because it's definitely something we're all going to experience. And also, I think that if there's ever the great art of surrendering, it is through the process of whether we've, had someone that we love depart. And sometimes someone that we might have had, I don't know if love is even the right word, but someone that we've had a relationship with that we have some incomplete business with. That there is also grief in not knowing that knowing that you're not going to be able to have a conversation with them in this particular lifetime, maybe through a medium, but in general, that you might have some of that unfinished business. So there's so many facets to it, but what I hear you saying is like just allowing yourself to feel all the things is really the part of it, probably the most healing part of it, even though it's also the most difficult part of it. And I also believe that there's so many ways that people grieve, and for anyone watching or listening, grief can come through not just the death of a person in our life, but it could be I'll give you a great example. Like, I'm part of a cancer community because I'm a cancer survivor, and sometimes grief was losing a body part. Grief is mourning a life that you had prior to that, major life event that you may not have anymore. And I know that all the time we experience grief in different ways, but so often people don't allow themselves to feel those feelings. And I believe that part of being human is that we get to feel those feelings, and that is actually how we free ourselves. That's freedom. Freedom comes when we allow ourselves to feel the messiness, and to feel the pain, and to feel the loss, to feel the love, to feel the anger, all of those things. Like, that's how we move it out of our body, and also energetically just give ourselves the opportunity to release it and know that this is an opportunity for that non-attachment. Like, I would love to have not had cancer and to have my own breasts. And you know what? I'm so grateful for my life, and I appreciate that I had them for the time that I had them, and that I appreciate that medical, miracles exist today that allow me to still thrive, even though I'm technically missing some body parts. So I think that, there's all of those things. And even, I don't know about you, but I have, parents that are getting older, and that's really come about this last year. It's been such a in my face, like, realization that they're not going to be here forever. And I think that part also, just mourning a little bit of what is to come, and also giving myself the opportunity to honor the cycle of life, and that it's how it works. Do you have any, like, I know that your background is your ethnicity, you're from the Caribbean, right? And like, I feel like other cultures do it so much better than sometimes we do it here in the US. And what did you learn about death and grief and some of these things? Like, what were some things that you might feel are maybe different in that way, or
Well, I think
a way that you're
most
maybe better at
cultures,
coping with it than some of
it
us?
goes back to what I was saying earlier about frequency, and how when you're living outside of a certain culture, you're open to a different frequency based on the environment, the nature around you or not, the people around you. And I think if you look at the historic journey of what death meant in indigenous cultures, even the Celtic cultures, the Druids, death was a celebration and an opportunity to applaud a certain life, almost in a legendary way. A grandmother, a grandfather, an aunt, a mentor, an elder of sorts. And if the person died young, it was a warrior, a queen, a prince. There was labels attached to bravery in battle, in war. Death wasn't something that was, from what I've read anyway, it wasn't something that is in this kind of box now that we've ticked in our 2024 society, which is about a
Mm-hmm.
frequency. I go back to this frequency and this vibration, that it's got to be about, you know, wearing black, and, there has to be a tradition. There are some cultures that refuse to wear black and will celebrate in a color that is more enlightening and more upbeat and a little bit more celebratory of the sunshine and the light of death, not the dark of death. Um, And there is ways that you can look
Mm.
at the light of death, look at the soul
Right.
moving forward, look at how you have an opportunity to transcend into a new relationship with what was human and now is angelic or spiritual or is part of nature. Some people put their ashes or the ashes of their loved ones into a plant or a rose bush, and you grow with the kind of energy of that person that they've
Mm-hmm.
lost. So I think there's so many ways that you can look at the process of loss and the frequency of that. And I'm saying frequency because when somebody leaves and says their last farewell, there is an opportunity to explore in yourself what feels fearful. In the movies, there is zombies and there is, this kind of Frankenstein-esque culture that when people die, they go to a place that is dark and they come back with a dark agenda to haunt you, persecute you, claim revenge, and where the culture has propagandized that way as a potential way of looking at death. But I think at the same time, there are opportunities through books and through certain movies. It's a Wonderful Life comes to mind, um, where you look at a story like that and you only see hope. And a lot of Frank Capra's films were about the hope of the human spirit and how you could transcend something that looked lost and dark, and how you could find a way to navigate through the light and the kind of joy of an achievement. And death is a passing on, but it can also be a way to reconnect with something that is unfamiliar to the frequency that you live in this society. So in some societies, you can use the elements, air, water, fire, and you can put the spirit of that person. In India, in the Ganges, they put you on a little raft and your body burns publicly and you float down this river, and that's your farewell. There's no 6 foot under the ground with a tombstone and ashes to ashes. No, it's almost like a Viking burial. And I think if you look at the ways that people celebrated loss, soldiers sometimes, you end up in a communal grave with people on a battlefield in a World War I. They were, a lot of the time, if bodies couldn't be found, they would just find bits of you and you would just be put in a communal grave, sometimes with the enemy, you know. So I don't think, see, I think we've got into a kind of way of living in boxes. It's like in London,
Yeah.
I've noticed that there's apartments being built everywhere, and it's almost like the millennia for how we live in a society is that we have to live in apartments, and the apartments are like new ways. Like people don't need gardens anymore if you've got a
Mm.
balcony, and you've got like a window box where you can put your plants and your flowers.
Mm.
So now we're all living in this kind of apartment way mentality where we live in either a very expensive box, we live in a middle class box, we live in a working class box, but they're apartments and they're all kind of Lego on top of each other. And I think one of the things that grief
Mm.
or loss does is it can give you an opportunity to elevate how you look up at life. Literally, you visually, because we spend so much time looking down at our phones, I don't think we actually express how we can
Right.
transcend that loss into something spiritual by looking up. And I don't mean looking at the clouds in the sky and going, or looking for something to give you answers. I just mean in how you live your life in an elevated way. Like for you to just say that you experience loss of body parts through cancer, and that you have a place in yourself, Mary, where you've surrendered to
Mm.
that, and you're now graciously thankful and courageously saying that as a someone who's experienced that, for all your listeners, that you can overcome this. It doesn't have to be head in the sand, missing what you had,
Mm.
and now that loss has now defined you. You've chosen to use that as a way to redefine yourself and
Mm.
to help your listeners to go, look, there is a way out of this. There is a choice. Yes, I could be a victim and go, look what happened to me. Look what's been done to
Right.
me. Or I could, you know, I won't absorb this. I'll observe it,
Right.
and it's happened to me. But it's not a personal thing, because listeners that have experienced similar situations or the same in their cells or in their own family. So it's that thing about when you don't absorb something,
Mm.
you have so much more freedom to look at the choices that it gives you. But once you've absorbed that, whether it's good, bad, toxic, that person, that situation, that job, that money, some people take money knowing it's come from a bad place, and they decide that they don't want to look at where it came from. They just want to enjoy the spending of it. So so they've made a choice that even though this money might be illegal, they're going to take it anyway, because they've justified why it's a good thing to do. That's a choice. But then the consequences of that are also a choice. And you have to accept that if you're not going to take all of the elements of the things that you say and do and then deal with that, then somehow you rob yourself of the opportunity to expand, because you're only looking at it in a particular way. I was saying earlier, none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. I've made mistakes. People I love have made mistakes. Family members have made mistakes. My family, parents have made mistakes. Everybody's family makes mistakes. And whether it was deliberate or intentional, the trick is that you've got to find a place in yourself to not attach that choice of being a victim, because once you attach the victim to a pain, I think in my experience, I've seen how it starts to affect the health
Mm.
of that person. It starts to affect the mind, the internal, and them holding on to something that they think makes them feel like a winner. In them, in the bubble, they think they're winning, but their body is screaming,
Right.
"Don't do this."
Right.
Their body,
Mm. Right. Right. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. It's so, again, so many lessons in just leadership from the conversation we're having today, because there's so many parallels. And this always goes back to being someone who can take full ownership, and also someone who doesn't allow themselves to wallow in victimhood, because the more we can step away from the victimhood and figure out how can we be the victor, like the better life gets. And you guys, the better it is, the better it is. And so much of it starts with your mindset, and it starts with how you're choosing to look at life. And I'm not saying that, you bypass that, bad things don't happen in the world, or that bad things aren't going to show up at your door, because it certainly happens. And you can take those things and choose how you want to observe them instead of absorbing them, as Treva said. And that part, I think, is where most people are getting it wrong. And that's why they're living in such misery. And it's knowing that we all have a choice. We all have a choice on how we want to write the script. We had a choice in how we want to write the movie. We get a choice in all of this. And it's a beautiful way to be able to come up from the ashes of something where you can treat yourself like a victim and decide to treat yourself like a victor. And that's how you can look at it in your family, in your life. And you can look at hard things and you can find the lessons and you can find the beauty. And sometimes maybe the lesson is just to have that experience, to share it with someone else who is also sharing that grief, or
yeah,
sharing that pain, about that human connection, because we miss that so often when we bypass these things. And so it's not about bypassing them, but it's being able to come up from those ashes and give things a proper way, right? If I die and I get to be reborn, my ashes are used to help grow a tree, then that's pretty beautiful. It's beautiful that you can take, right? That you can take ashes and make life from it. And I think
And
that's, you know,
it's
that's the
also,
overarching thing that I hear you saying.
just
And
to
I love
tail
that.
end that,
It's really
to your
beautiful.
point, that what I was saying earlier about how we don't celebrate the runner that comes in 11th at the Olympics. It's this thing where if we only celebrate the
Right.
winners, we won't celebrate when we lose. We'll treat ourselves in the same way that we treat the person who lost.
Mm.
We'll discard ourselves. We won't look at the pain of loss. We won't look at the hard work that took us to that moment where we lost. It could have been a hairpin, you know, the decision that decided what was the win or the lose. Sometimes you watch sports and, you know, it's a point thing, it's half a point, it's a second, it's the last minute, the team's winning, and then that last second, the whole thing. That's why we love the drama of sport. So I always say, you know, if you can really
Right.
understand that you are the one that decides what a winner looks like based on how you live your life. And if you lose every day because you don't have the right job, you're depressed, you're on medication, the doctor ABC about your health, your family, your friends, your relationship, your
Mm.
kids, your marriage, everything's going wrong, and you can't see how you're winning in this moment because
Right.
everything just looks bleak and doomed. That's a choice that you experience. And when you absorb that choice, you think it's only happening to you, Mary. You know, like people think, oh, and when they regurgitate or recycle the story to you, you hear them saying it over the phone, on a text. You hear them recycling the same language over and over again. And that's what frequency, because the words that we use define how we
Mm-hmm.
think, how we live, how we drink, how we treat our loved ones, our kids, our families. And we've got to be really careful about the things that we say and do because we're groomed with that fear that we always have to be looking across the fence. And we always have to feel that if someone looks like they're doing better than us, then they're winning and we're losing. They drive a car, they've got a better this, they've got. So we're groomed to believe that
Right.
losing is a sin. But then the definition of what
Right.
that loss
Right.
is sometimes isn't yours. Society tells you that, oh, you don't live on this street, you don't drive that car. So that means that you're losing. And then we buy that. We buy what society says and says, okay, I don't drive this nice car, I'm losing. I don't have that nice house, I'm losing. So where do I go from here? Do I surrender to that societal viewpoint of myself? And now I have to do it the way society tells me to do it. I have to attain that recognition by the rules society says, or can I trust that being an individual, trusting that my purpose, my lane, my yellow brick road is my. I may not meet the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Lion. I may
Mm-hmm.
not have Toto the dog, but I'm going to continue on this path because
Right.
that's the path I trust and that's the path I have faith in. And if it doesn't materialize in the way that I want it to, and my desires aren't fulfilled, it still doesn't mean that I'm a loser. It still doesn't mean because surely the winning is in the attempt. Surely the winning is in getting up
Right.
every day and making sure that you've achieved feeding your purpose, paying that bill, feeding your loved ones, putting gas in the car, going to that event when you didn't feel up to it, when you didn't feel strong, but you did it
Mm-hmm.
anyway. Driving when you're tired, but you want to get to that place because that place or that event or that wedding means something to you. It's surely the winning is when you challenge yourself, when your mind and body says, "Don't do it, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Don't feel it. Look the other way." And then you challenge yourself and say, no, I do want to look, I do want to feel, I do want to, and then surely there should be some definition in that space that has some kind of winning connotation, because you're challenging the the mind and soul that you've been groomed to believe, which is the frequency you live on. And like death, you get an opportunity to step outside of the frequency, and you can accept that your loved ones might be on a different plane. They might connect with you through your phone, through little miracles, through, electrical things going wrong, or you forget, or deja vus, and
Yeah.
the senses then become heightened. And I've always questioned, I just feel that we've always got more senses than we're allowed to believe, that we don't just have five. I think we've got, I think just being alive is a sense. The things we
Right.
don't know, we don't understand the complexity of what happens when we open
Hmm.
our eyes and we look out. We don't understand how we breathe through our nostrils and through our mouths. We don't understand, scientifically we understand, but the everyday things that still leave doctors and surgeons scratching their heads about, going, we've never seen this disease before, we've never seen this illness, we've never seen something like this, and they have to go back and start again. Surely that's life. It's the dog that digs that little hole to hide the bone, and then the dog doesn't surrender to just that bone. The dog will surrender to any bone that comes its way, because that bone has got nutrition, and it might go back to the bone it's buried, but it won't exclude the bones that are coming to it, that he doesn't or she doesn't know might come day, the next hour. So I guess the metaphor is that we've always got little doggy
Right.
bones and doggy biscuits coming to us, little kind of little victories. And if you don't look at the golden nuggets and try to find a way to encapsulate them as winning, then you're always fighting your general life to feel like you're winning, because society says if you don't have these 10 things in your life, then we don't consider you to be a winner. But that doesn't mean that you're not a good father, you're not a good wife, you're not a good mother, you're not a good grandparent, you're not a good friend. So don't those things count for winning as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that so often we're too busy looking also at life as winning or losing. Whereas it's like we can count them as wins, or we can just see everything as an experience. Everything is an experience, and we're always getting this multiple choice. And sometimes we make a great choice, and other times it doesn't feel like a great choice. And we hope that when we get that multiple choice question again, then maybe we've learned from it, or maybe we haven't. We get to live an experience all over again. And that's, I'd say, where the real winning takes place, is when we have an unpleasant experience. If we can come back to it and pick a different choice, and start to figure out for ourselves, oh, life is just a series of curiosities, right? And a series of lessons, and a series of learning and attachment, so that we, yes, can connect to people when they've gone through the same thing that we have, or might be going through something that we can share, and also that we can let things go, and we can learn to move on, and that we can learn to really just see the world and just know that this is everyone's experience. Whatever feelings you felt, I've probably felt at some point in my life too. Like, we share that. This is the human experience, is that we get feelings and senses. And like you said, I definitely don't think we use enough of the senses. There are probably more than just the five that have been identified. They say women have a sixth sense, but I think all of us do. All of us have that intuitive internal, spirit that speaks to us, and shows us the way, and helps guide us, that we only see these things looking
You,
backwards, when we can connect
you
all
know,
the
I
dots
think
and
there's
we go,
magic
oh,
in every
look at that.
emotion that
Look
we
at the
feel.
magic
If
of how
we
that
eat an
happened.
orange and we feel the vitamin C and the vitality of a fruit, I believe that that's magical. I think when you feel pain, when you apologize to someone, that's magical, because when you remember, sometimes when you watch the magic trick, he saws the girl in half, and we look away and we go, "Oh my God!" And then he splits the table, and you can part of half of her, and she's waving in one and the other legs, and you're
Right.
thinking, how is it? And then he puts it together, and she comes back as a whole for life, because when you feel broken, you are in half.
Right.
Put that piece back together again. And sometimes an apology
Mm.
can't resolve it. You apologizing can't resolve it. A pay rise can't resolve it. Someone loving you can't resolve it. Children loving you can't resolve it. There's no peace in your eyes because in you, you're just broken. You can't put that two pieces that's been cut in half together again. So how do you resolve that? How do you find a way to put yourself back together again if there's no help available? You've got to look inside. You've got to find, again, the winner, the warrior, the ancestor, the thing that kept your family name going through the DNA over the centuries. Because your family kept your bloodline alive in different ways.
Mm.
Choices were made, good or bad. Disagreements were made, good or bad. But we are the
Right.
result of that choice. Today,
Mm-hmm.
2024, we are the choice of all our ancestors, all the many grandmothers and grandfathers that came before us. So we don't
Mm.
know their journeys. We hear little family stories and anecdotes and stuff, but we don't know the full journey of what was done, good or bad, to create something for us to be existing there and our children to continue, etc.,
Right.
etc. So if we don't understand, it means that we don't really understand anything.
Right.
So if we don't understand anything, why are we getting so upset about what the ego tells us we should understand? If we don't like green and they say we're going to make green illegal, PC to like green, everybody has to like yellow. And
Mm-hmm.
there you are going, but I love green. Oh, I just want to wear green and green. They go, no, you can't wear green anymore. You know, what do you do with that feeling? What do you do with that? To me, that feeling is magical because whatever you choose to do from that feeling will be a magical experience. You needed to feel the pain, which is magical pain, to find a magical resolve, because if you make the pain different from the joy, you've always got dark and light. You've always got a divide between something that happened to you where you feel victimized and you can't move on, and something that happened to you where you felt joy and recognition and applause and you were rewarded. And you put the two of them in two different categories. But the reality is, like I was saying earlier, both are the same because both intertwine. You have a good sunny day, and within an hour, it starts to rain. And now you're ruined. Oh, I was ready to wear this thing, and now it's all, and everything.
Right.
But the day still has hours before it turns into the next day. So do you surrender to that and go, oh, now my suit's wet. I'm now wet. I'm
Right.
now broken. I can't fix myself until I get a new suit or I get a new pair of shoes or I get a new
Right.
hair or I get a new whatever. And we're groomed, what I was saying earlier, we're groomed with
Right.
fear. We're groomed to believe that having an opinion or wearing something or doing something challenging is something that we're going to be chastised for or judged for. And I think at times it goes too far with the judgment, the cancelling, and the uh, way that people are told you have to hate this person now and you have to love that.
Right. Everyone does the thing and they jump on the bandwagon of believing that now something has to be a certain way. We can't all have original thoughts. We can't be treat something with compassion, right? And I think that that's the biggest also like learning that shows up is like how can we treat
Yes.
while someone is getting put up on a cross somewhere, how can we treat them with compassion, right? Knowing that every time we point a finger, there's probably at least five or six pointing back at us. And I think sometimes we can be so quick to make a judgment and forget, right? And ultimately how beautiful forgiveness is because it sets us free of having to feel that way about someone else or to feel a certain reaction that doesn't feel good in our own bodies, right? Like it never, those feelings of hate and anger, those aren't the ones that the body heals by. They're the ones that you want to be able to feel and release. And also just how good I feel like forgiveness is the healing salve
Yeah, and
that is on
I
the
was going to
wound
say that,
of anger
you
and
know,
disappointment.
if you apologize with sincerity for doing something that may have left someone broken, and the apology isn't received in the way it's given, so you've apologized and you've said what you've said, and that person can't forgive you. You can't hold on to that unforgiving, because that doesn't free you of what that person is holding on to
Right.
for whatever reason. And then you then punish yourself for
Right.
decades because that person hasn't released you from your apology. And I think that I've learned that over the years, if you apologize sincerely and you can't find a way to navigate around how to move on and heal from that, then you hurt yourself. If someone has done you a wrong and the apology doesn't come, or the apology isn't acknowledged, and they're in a "I've done nothing wrong," and they flip it and they gaslight you and they project everything as your fault, then you have every reason to disengage and say, I won't engage in this then, because there's no apology, there's no recognition that something was broken. So I won't acknowledge this. I'm walking away. But if you can acknowledge that, and that's where I think the magic is, because if you can acknowledge that pain, that awkwardness, that embarrassment, that humiliation, the thing that makes you want to hide your face, if you can acknowledge that, and with that, you can then find a way to navigate through liking yourself again, through loving what has pained someone. That journey to love yourself again is magical,
Mm.
because you will find all the flaws that you may have hated yourself for, the things that you rejected yourself for, the trauma it gave you based on childhood trauma, abusive, emotional, whatever it was that happened. We're all wounded, we're all traumatic.
Sure.
And me working with kids as a child myself once, and still internally we all are, one of the things that I learned was that most children don't feel good about themselves. They don't. You learn to love yourself going into the teenagey, early, rebellious, I'm looking for an identity. What do I want to represent myself as? And then into early adulthood, and then adulthood when you either start a family or not, or you find a job or not, or you're in a relationship or not, or whatever the journey is. But most children don't feel good about themselves. And what we have to understand is that it's not that the parent has to take responsibility for the child not feeling good about themselves. It could be an autistic thing. It could be something that's undetected. It could just be a personality thing where one child is just different from the other child based on whatever personality, DNA. So if if you know that children don't feel good about themselves, you have to
Right.
understand that adults take that wound and they take it into adulthood, and then adults don't feel good about themselves.
Sure. Sure, it happened. For sure, it happens. And history has shown us that over and over again. And if any of you have connected with anyone else, you know this is true too. Even the most confident people that you see in the world, their drive is either out of fear or it's out of reward. And most people experience some level of fear, and that's what keeps them going, right? It's like you might have a fear of not being able to feed your family, and so that's why you work so hard, or you work 3 jobs. There's all kinds of ways we can go with that. Those are very much the lessons of life. Trev, we are coming to the end of our extended version of the
Well,
show.
I
Any
mean,
last words you
just
want to
thank you
leave
for
our
the
audience with
opportunity
today
of
before we wrap up?
sharing some thoughts with you, and you sharing thoughts with me, and hopefully the audience will share and, you know, gain something from our conversation. And thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing, not just with me, but with all your guests in trying to heal.
Yeah.
Um, and all I would say, because there's so much to say, and sometimes you can't say it all because the windows of time just aren't there. But I think if there was one thing that I would say to people listening who may be in a good space or not, whatever that looks like, don't judge it. Don't judge the space. Just be in it. Like George Harrison used to say, be here now. And if it makes you smile, be there now. If the now makes you
Mm,
unhappy, lonely, lost, making choices that aren't working for you, be here now as well, because there's magic in both. And just because life is going great and everything's moving the way you want it to, and you think you're in control, life has a way of going, actually, you're not in control. Watch this. And 1 second, one split, wrong place, wrong time, decision, and then suddenly life is not so great. Well, you've still got to be here now in
right.
that moment as well. It doesn't change just because things went the other way. So my kind of parting words to you and your audience would be, whatever the story, it's your movie, it's your screenplay, just be here now and don't judge it. Even if it goes on for 10 years, we hear stories all the time about people with disabilities who went through the most amazing journey of pain and struggle, and they overcame it on the 10th year. It wasn't the fifth or the sixth. They, for some reason, had to struggle through all of that in order to achieve whatever they did in the 10th year. And then some people don't see the 10th year, and they may leave, like we were talking earlier about grieving, they may leave before. Um, and what can you do but be here now in both scenarios? So that's all I would say from George Harrison um, kind of teachings, and he learned that from other teachers. Don't judge yourself. Just be here now. And when you're here now, it means that you don't listen to the frequencies that are telling you how to think, who to love, who to hate, who to cancel, who to unfriend. You know, just you make the choices about the screenplay. It's your 3 act life. And some of us are the first, second, or third act of, and you can write the ending. Even if it was a bad first and middle act, the last act can still be victorious with a happy ending. So it's basically how you want to write your screenplay.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Well, with on that note, be here now. And on top of that, be here next week as we have another great guest every Wednesday on the show, and then some post show love. With that, wish you all peace. I wish everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day, and we'll see you next week. Trev, thank you so much for being here as our guest today. If you want more Trev, you can go to imdb.com. You can also look up all of the work that he's done and been involved with. And of course, check the show notes for more
God bless you.
information
Thank you all.
to
Thank
check
you.
out more stuff on Trev. All right, guys. Thank you and have a great night.